"I'm my father's lawyer," declared the 10-year-old girl, her tiny voice somehow cutting through the murmur of the packed courtroom like a blade. The entire room erupted in laughter. The judge smirked behind his glasses, shaking his head in disbelief. The prosecutor rolled his eyes and chuckled condescendingly. Even the bailiffs were grinning among themselves, treating it like some adorable child had wandered into their serious adult courthouse by mistake. But when this little girl opened her mouth and started citing actual case law with the precision of a seasoned attorney, when she began dismantling the prosecution's evidence piece by piece with surgical accuracy, when she exposed a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of power and corruption, nobody was laughing anymore. What happened next was so unbelievable, so absolutely unprecedented, that it would shake the entire legal system to its core and change the life of every single person in that courtroom forever. You see, when Marcus Thompson, a humble janitor who had worked honestly and faithfully for 20 years, was falsely accused of stealing millions of dollars worth of confidential documents from the very law firm where he had mopped floors and emptied trash cans every single night, everyone expected him to take a plea deal and disappear quietly into the broken system. But his 10-year-old daughter Maya had been secretly studying law for 3 years in that very law firm's library while her father worked his night shifts. And she was about to shock everyone with what she had learned during those silent, after-hours study sessions that nobody knew about. This is the incredible true story of how a child's unwavering love for her father brought down an empire of corruption and proved that justice doesn't always wear expensive suits or carry law degrees. Dear viewer, if you are watching this story for the first time, I humbly request you to hit that subscribe button and press the bell icon right now. Don't miss the notifications of our daily published incredible true stories that will blow your mind. Trust me, what happens next will restore your faith in justice and prove that courage has absolutely no age limit. Now, let me tell you about the morning that changed everything and turned a 10-year-old girl into the youngest legal warrior in American history. The morning of October 15th started exactly like any other for Marcus Thompson. The 53-year-old janitor hummed softly under his breath as he pushed his familiar cleaning cart through the pristine marble hallways of Whitmore and Associates, following the exact same route he had taken religiously for the past 20 years. The brass nameplate on each office door gleamed from his meticulous polishing the night before, each one representing powerful lawyers who barely noticed his existence unless they needed something cleaned up or thrown away. "Morning, Mr. Marcus," called out Stephanie from behind the grand reception desk. She was one of the precious few people in the entire building who treated him like a genuine human being rather than invisible furniture that happened to move around and clean things. "Morning, Steph," Marcus replied with his characteristic warm smile that had never dimmed despite years of being overlooked. "How's that beautiful baby girl of yours doing?" "Growing like a weed, as always. She's walking now, getting into everything." "Hey, did little Maya get her school project turned in on time?" Marcus's weathered face lit up with unmistakable fatherly pride, the kind that comes from a single parent who has dedicated his entire life to his child's success. "She sure did. Built an amazing working model of the American justice system. Used the law library here after hours to research every detail. Mr. Whitmore gave permission years ago, remember? Said it was fine as long as she didn't disturb anything." What Marcus didn't mention, what he couldn't have known, was that his brilliant 10-year-old daughter had spent those countless quiet hours doing far more than just elementary school homework. While he meticulously cleaned offices, emptied wastebaskets, and polished expensive wooden conference tables until they gleamed, Maya devoured complex legal textbooks, studied intricate case studies, and absorbed court transcripts with the desperate hunger of someone who instinctively understood that knowledge was the only weapon she could afford in a world that judged people by their bank accounts. It had started innocently enough as simple childhood curiosity about the mysterious world her father served but could never truly access or participate in. 3 years later, at the impossible age of 10, Maya understood criminal law, constitutional rights, and courtroom procedure better than many first-year law students. She had memorized landmark case precedents, studied famous trials throughout history, and absorbed every legal principle she could find in those intimidating leather-bound volumes that lined the firm's extensive, expensive library. Every night while her father mopped floors and cleaned bathrooms, Maya sat cross-legged on the library carpet, reading about Miranda rights, due process, burden of proof, and the constitutional protections that were supposed to shield innocent people from false accusations. She learned about Brady violations, prosecutorial misconduct, and ineffective assistance of counsel. She studied the cases that defined American justice, never imagining that one day she would need every single piece of that knowledge to save the most important person in her world. But this peaceful, routine morning was about to be shattered in the most devastating and life-changing way possible. Richard Whitmore III burst through the main entrance doors like a man possessed by rage, his expensive Italian suit unable to hide the fury twisting his aristocratic features into something ugly and dangerous. His face was flushed red with anger, his usually perfect silver hair disheveled, and his cold blue eyes held the kind of entitled wrath that came from generations of old money and even older prejudices. "Where is he?" Richard's voice boomed through the elegant reception area with the force of a thunderclap, causing every head to turn and every conversation to stop mid-sentence. "Where's that thieving janitor? Where's Thompson?" Marcus froze completely mid-motion, his calloused hand still gripping the worn mop handle, dirty water dripping steadily onto the spotless marble floor he had just finished cleaning. After 20 years of respectful, dedicated service, of arriving early and staying late, of treating every office with care and every document with respect, he had never heard such pure venom directed at him. "Mr. Whitmore," Marcus said carefully, his voice steady despite the sudden fear creeping up his spine like ice water. "Is something wrong, sir? Has something happened?" "Wrong?" Richard's voice dripped with contempt and barely contained rage. "Wrong? The Hartley files are missing, Thompson. Confidential merger documents worth millions of dollars. Documents that could make or break billion-dollar deals. And guess whose keycard was used to access the secure filing room last night at exactly 11:47 p.m.? Marcus felt his entire world tilting dangerously, like he was standing on the deck of a sinking ship. The floor seemed to shift beneath his feet. "Sir, I was cleaning the offices, just like I always do. Just like I've done every single night for 20 years. I have authorization to access those areas for cleaning purposes. You know that." "Save your pathetic lies for the police," Richard cut him off sharply, pulling out his expensive smartphone with trembling fingers that betrayed his fury. "I'm pressing criminal charges right now. 20 years of letting you people into our private spaces, our confidential areas, and this is how you repay our trust and generosity? This is how you show gratitude?" The phrase "you people" hit Marcus like a physical blow to the chest, knocking the wind out of him. In those two simple words, he heard every stereotype, every assumption, every prejudice that had followed him his entire working life. Despite 2 decades of honest, faithful work, despite never taking so much as a paper clip that didn't belong to him, despite treating every client file with the same respect he'd want his own private information treated, he was still just you people to Richard Whitmore III. "Mr. Whitmore, please," Marcus said, fighting desperately to keep his dignity intact even as his world crumbled around him. "I have never taken anything that didn't belong to me. Not ever. You can check the security cameras. You can search my locker, my car, my apartment. I'm completely innocent of whatever you think I've done." Richard's laugh was cold and calculating, the sound of a predator who had cornered his prey. "The security cameras? Oh, how incredibly convenient that they mysteriously malfunctioned during your shift last night. Amazing how technology fails exactly when we need it most, don't you think, Thompson?" The implications hit Marcus like a sledgehammer. Someone had deliberately corrupted the security footage. Someone had planned this. Someone wanted him to take the fall for something he hadn't done, and they had been clever enough to eliminate the evidence that would prove his innocence. Within one devastating hour, Marcus Thompson found himself being led out of Whitmore and Associates in cold steel handcuffs, the metal cutting into his wrists as his co-workers watched in stunned, horrified silence. Stephanie had tears streaming down her face, her hand pressed to her mouth in shock. The other janitors and maintenance workers looked terrified, wondering if they would be next, if their own jobs and freedom were somehow in jeopardy. Most of the lawyers averted their gazes uncomfortably, already accepting his guilt because it was so much easier than questioning one of the senior partners who signed their paychecks and controlled their careers. The walk to the police car felt like the longest, most humiliating journey of Marcus's entire life. 20 years of arriving early, staying late, treating every office with respect, every document with care, every person with dignity, all of it meant absolutely nothing now. In the eyes of the law, in the eyes of society, he was just another statistic, another poor man who had supposedly given in to temptation and stolen from his wealthy employers. As the police car pulled away from the building where he had dedicated 2 decades of his life, Marcus thought about his daughter. His brilliant, beautiful 10-year-old Maya, who believed in justice and fairness and the idea that good people who worked hard would be treated with respect and dignity. How could he explain to her that the system he had taught her to believe in had failed him so completely? But Marcus Thompson had raised his daughter to believe in truth, in justice, and in the idea that the American legal system, despite its flaws, was designed to protect the innocent and punish the guilty. He had taught Maya that everyone deserved a fair trial, competent legal representation, and the presumption of innocence until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Neither of them had any idea that these beliefs were about to be tested in ways they could never have imagined. Neither of them knew that a 10-year-old girl's secret legal education was about to become the weapon that would bring down an entire conspiracy. At Jefferson Elementary School, Maya Thompson was in the middle of presenting her elaborate social studies project on the American justice system to her 5th grade class when Mrs. Chen, the school principal, appeared in the classroom doorway wearing an expression that made every student fall completely silent. Maya's project was impressive for a 10-year-old, a detailed poster board showing the 3 branches of government, the Bill of Rights, and famous Supreme Court cases. She had spent weeks researching it in the Whitmore Library, using the same law books that real attorneys studied, though her classmates had no idea about the depth of legal knowledge she had acquired. Maya Thompson, Mrs. Chen said quietly, her voice carrying an unusual gravity that seemed to fill the entire classroom. Please come with me immediately. Bring all your things. Maya's teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, frowned with obvious concern. She's right in the middle of her presentation, Mrs. Chen. The children have been looking forward to this all week. Can this wait until... No, Mrs. Chen interrupted firmly, her tone brooking no argument. This absolutely cannot wait. Maya, gather your materials now. We need to go. Maya's heart began to race as she quickly gathered her carefully prepared presentation materials with shaking hands. Her project had detailed the constitutional protections that were supposed to safeguard every American citizen, the right to a fair trial, the presumption of innocence, the guarantee of legal representation. She had researched famous cases where these rights had protected innocent people from wrongful conviction. Now, walking down the familiar school hallway beside the grim-faced principal, those constitutional protections felt like distant, abstract concepts that existed only in textbooks. In the principal's office, Maya found Mrs. Washington, her father's dear friend from their apartment building, waiting with red-rimmed eyes and a crumpled tissue in her trembling hands. Mrs. Washington had always been like an aunt to Maya, the closest thing she had to extended family in their small world. Maya, sweetheart, Mrs. Chen began gently, crouching down to the 10-year-old's eye level. Mrs. Washington is here to take you home. There's been a serious family emergency that requires immediate attention. Maya's stomach dropped to her feet like a stone. She had no relatives except her father. If Mrs. Washington was here instead of him, if she was crying, something terrible had happened to the only family Maya had in the world. Is Daddy hurt? Maya asked, her voice smaller and more frightened than she intended. Was there an accident? Is he in the hospital? Please tell me what happened. Mrs. Washington stood up slowly and pulled Maya into a tight, desperate hug that smelled of vanilla perfume mixed with worry and fear. Oh, baby girl, your daddy needs you to be strong right now. Stronger than you've ever been in your whole life. What happened to him? Maya demanded, pulling back to look directly into Mrs. Washington's familiar face, searching for answers in her expression. Tell me exactly what happened to my father. Mrs. Washington's voice broke as she spoke. They They arrested him at work this morning, sweetheart. The police came and took him away in handcuffs. They're saying he stole something valuable from the law firm. Important documents worth millions of dollars. The words hit Maya like a physical blow, leaving her breathless and reeling as if someone had punched her in the stomach. Her father, the man who returned extra change at the grocery store even when they desperately needed every penny, who had taught her that integrity meant doing the right thing even when no one was watching, who worked 2 jobs to keep them afloat and never complained about his aching back or tired feet, accused of theft. That's impossible, Maya said with absolute certainty, her young voice carrying a conviction that surprised the adults. Daddy would never steal anything. Never. Not even if we were starving. He's the most honest person in the world. I know, baby. I know he is. But they've set his bail at $50,000. That's more money than any of us have. We're trying to figure out how to help him, but... I want to see him, Maya interrupted firmly. Take me to see him right now. Maya, honey, jail isn't a place for children. It's scary, Ann. I don't care if it's scary, Maya said with steel in her voice that made her sound much older than 10 years old. Take me to him now. He needs to know that I believe him. He needs to know that someone is going to fight for him. Mrs. Washington recognized that expression, that tone of voice. She had seen it in Marcus's eyes when he was absolutely determined about something important. Father and daughter shared the same unshakable resolve when it came to fighting for what was right and protecting the people they loved. That evening, Maya sat across from her father in the visiting room of the county jail, separated by thick, scratched plexiglass that made everything look distorted and wrong, like they were underwater. Marcus tried to smile for his daughter's sake, but she could see the fear and confusion in his kind eyes, the way his broad shoulders had slumped with the weight of false accusations and the devastating knowledge that the system he had taught her to respect had failed him completely. Baby girl, Marcus said softly, pressing his weathered hand against the cold glass. I didn't do this thing they're saying I did. I would never steal from anyone, especially not from the place where I work. I know, Daddy. Maya pressed her small hand against the glass, trying to match his gesture exactly. I know you didn't do it. Now tell me everything that happened. Every single detail, every conversation, every person who was there. Maya, sweetheart, you're only 10 years old. You don't need to worry about complicated grown-up problems like this. This will all get sorted out somehow. I have a lawyer, well, they assigned me one from the public defender's office. He seems like he might be a decent man. Have you actually met with him? Maya asked sharply, her young mind already working through the implications. Well, briefly yesterday. For maybe 10 minutes. He looked through some papers and said the evidence against me looks pretty bad, but he's going to try to work out some kind of plea deal to keep me from going to prison for too many years. Maya felt something cold and sharp twist in her stomach like a knife. A plea deal? Daddy, do you know what a plea deal means? It means admitting you're guilty of something you didn't do. I know, baby girl, but sometimes that's just how the legal system works in the real world. Sometimes you have to accept the best deal you can get, even when it's not fair, even when it's not right. No. Maya's voice was quiet but absolutely firm, carrying a determination that seemed impossible in someone so young. No, that's not how it's supposed to work. That's not what the Constitution says. That's not what justice means. Marcus stared at his daughter through the scratched plexiglass, really seeing her for perhaps the first time. When had his little girl developed such strong opinions about the legal system? When had she learned to speak about constitutional law like she understood it? Maya, sweetheart, where did you learn about all this legal stuff? I've been reading, Daddy. While you cleaned their offices at night, I studied everything I could find in their law library. For 3 years, I've been learning about criminal law, constitutional rights, court procedures. I know about discovery, evidence chains, reasonable doubt, prosecutorial misconduct. I probably know more about criminal defense than that public defender who doesn't care enough to spend more than 10 minutes on your case. Baby girl, Marcus said slowly, his voice filled with wonder and concern, when did you grow up so fast? The moment they put handcuffs on my hero, she replied quietly, her young eyes blazing with fierce determination. Now tell me everything that happened yesterday. Every detail, every conversation, every person who was in the building. We're going to prove your innocence, Daddy. We're going to fight this with everything we have. Sweetheart, I don't have money for a real lawyer. The kind who might actually fight hard for me, who might actually care about the truth. Then we'll fight for ourselves, Maya said simply, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. You taught me that justice doesn't belong only to rich people, Daddy. You taught me that everyone deserves to be treated fairly under the law, no matter who they are or how much money they have. Time to find out if that's actually true. As visiting hours ended and Maya was forced to leave her father behind those concrete walls and steel bars, she walked out with a notebook full of carefully written details, a burning sense of injustice that felt like fire in her chest, and a determination that would soon shock everyone who had already written off Marcus Thompson as just another poor man who had made a mistake. They had no idea what was coming. They had no idea that a 10-year-old girl who had spent 3 years secretly studying law was about to take on an entire corrupt legal establishment. They had no idea that sometimes the smallest warriors fight the biggest battles. And they definitely had no idea that she was going to win. The courthouse steps seemed to stretch endlessly as Maya climbed them 3 days later, her best dress slightly too small, her father's case file clutched in a folder made from cardboard in desperate hope. The preliminary hearing was set for 9 a.m., and she had been preparing since dawn, reviewing every note, every legal precedent, every constitutional protection she had memorized over the past 3 years. At just 10 years old, Maya Thompson was about to do something that had never been attempted in the history of American jurisprudence. Inside, the courtroom smelled of old wood, stale air, and crushed dreams. Maya took a seat in the gallery, watching with growing horror as defendants shuffled through like products on an assembly line of injustice. Each person got maybe 5 minutes before their fate was decided by people who had already forgotten their names before the next case was called. Case number 4851, State vs. Marcus Thompson, the bailiff announced in a bored monotone. Maya's father entered wearing an orange jumpsuit that made him look guilty before anyone said a word. His court-appointed lawyer, Mr. Brewster, looked like he would rather be anywhere else in the world. According to Maya's research, he had met with her father exactly once for 10 minutes and had already suggested taking a plea deal without even reviewing the evidence. Judge Eleanor Whitmore presided with the kind of stern authority that came from old money and older prejudices. Maya had researched her thoroughly, Harvard Law School, third-generation judge, and most importantly, aunt to Richard Whitmore III. The conflict of interest was so obvious it hurt, but nobody seemed to care about something so trivial as judicial ethics. Mr. Thompson, you are charged with grand theft, breaking and entering, and corporate espionage, Judge Whitmore announced. How do you plead? Brewster barely looked up from his phone. Not guilty, Your Honor, he mumbled, clearly going through the motions. District Attorney James Crawford stood with the confidence of a man who had never lost a case he actually cared about. Your Honor, the state presents compelling evidence. The defendant's keycard was used to access restricted areas during the night shift. Valuable documents worth millions of dollars are missing. The security footage from that night is mysteriously corrupted, which strongly suggests deliberate tampering by someone with inside access. That's ridiculous, Marcus spoke up from the defendant's table. I've worked there for 20 years. I live in the same apartment I've had for a decade. Where exactly would I run to? Judge Whitmore's gavel cracked like a whip. The defendant will remain silent unless addressed directly by the court. Maya watched her father shrink back, saw Brewster whisper something that looked suspiciously like, just take the plea deal, and felt her small hands clench into fists. This wasn't justice. This was a railroad job, and her father was tied to the tracks while everyone watched the train approach. Crawford continued his theatrical performance for the cameras. Furthermore, Your Honor, we have evidence that Mr. Thompson has been accessing the law library after hours without proper supervision, clearly using his position to case the firm for valuable information and client confidentiality breaches. Maya's heart sank. They were twisting her innocent study sessions into something sinister, making her quest for knowledge look like criminal reconnaissance. Judge Whitmore leaned forward with obvious interest. Does the defense have anything meaningful to say in response to these serious allegations? Brewster finally put down his phone with visible reluctance. Yes, Your Honor. My client is a, good person. Hard worker. Clean record. No prior arrests or convictions. That was it. That was the entire defense strategy. Motion to deny bail and hold the defendant pending trial, Crawford said with obvious satisfaction. Your Honor, Crawford smiled triumphantly, given the substantial value of the stolen property and the defendant's clear breach of trust after 20 years of employment, the state believes he poses a significant flight risk in. Objection. The word rang out clear and strong from the gallery, cutting through Crawford's speech like a sword through silk. Every head in the courtroom turned in stunned silence. Maya stood slowly, her chin raised with determination, her cardboard folder held like a shield against the entire corrupt system. Judge Whitmore's face darkened with annoyance. Young lady, sit down immediately. This is a court of law, not a school playground. I am fully aware that this is a court of law, Your Honor, Maya replied with calm confidence. I am also aware that under Michigan Court Rule 2.117, Section C, ineffective assistance of counsel is grounds for immediate intervention when a defendant's constitutional rights are being violated. The courtroom fell into absolute silence. You could have heard a pin drop. Brewster's mouth hung open like a fish gasping for air. Crawford looked like someone had slapped him across the face with a wet fish. What is your name, child? Judge Whitmore's voice could have frozen fire. Maya Thompson, Your Honor. I am the defendant's daughter, and I am 10 years old. Bailiff, remove this child immediately. Actually, Your Honor, Maya said quickly, I am 10 years old, and under People v. Garcia, minors may address the court in matters directly affecting their welfare and custody arrangements. With my father facing imprisonment, I absolutely have legal standing to speak on his behalf. Crawford found his voice, sputtering with indignation. This is completely absurd. She's a child playing dress-up and quoting law she doesn't understand. This child, Maya interrupted smoothly, has noticed several serious procedural violations in the last 10 minutes. Would you like me to list them for the record, or should I wait for the appellate court to enumerate them during the inevitable appeal? Marcus stared at his daughter like he had never seen her before. Maya, baby, what are you doing? She met his eyes across the courtroom with love and determination. What you taught me, Daddy. Standing up for what's right, no matter how scary it gets. Judge Whitmore's knuckles were white as she gripped her gavel. Young lady, you are dangerously close to being held in contempt of court. Actually, Your Honor, I am in possession of evidence that Mr. Brewster has failed to review, evidence that conclusively proves my father's innocence. Evidence that suggests this entire case is built on fabricated accusations and conflicts of interest that reach, she paused dramatically, looking directly at the judge, surprisingly high levels of the local legal establishment. The tension in the courtroom was electric. Cell phones appeared throughout the gallery as people began recording. This was no longer just another routine preliminary hearing. This had become something unprecedented in American legal history. Your Honor, Maya continued, her voice steady despite her racing 10-year-old heart, I am formally requesting to serve as co-counsel for my father's defense under the Sixth Amendment right to counsel of choice. The laughter started with Crawford, spread to Brewster, and rippled through the courtroom like a wave. Even some of the bailiffs were chuckling. A 10-year-old lawyer? It was the most ridiculous thing anyone had ever heard. But Judge Whitmore wasn't laughing. Her experienced eyes studied the young girl who stood unflinching amid the mockery, holding that battered folder with such confidence, citing legal precedents without notes, challenging the entire system with the fearlessness that only comes from absolute moral certainty. Something in Maya's posture, in the way she held herself, in the legal citations she rattled off like a seasoned attorney, made the judge's stomach tighten with an unfamiliar sensation that might have been fear. Enough! Judge Whitmore's gavel cracked against the bench, silencing the laughter instantly. Young lady, while your performance is admirable, this court does not entertain children playing lawyer. Bailiff Harrison, please escort Miss Thompson back to the gallery where she belongs. Your Honor, Maya's voice cut through the tension clearly. I would like to reference State v. Caldwell, where the Michigan Supreme Court held that denying a defendant their constitutional choice of counsel, regardless of that counsel's age or formal certification, violates the Sixth Amendment when special circumstances apply and the defendant's rights are in jeopardy. Bailiff Harrison hesitated, his hand hovering near Maya's shoulder. Even he could sense that something extraordinary was happening here. Crawford stood up, his face red with indignation and embarrassment. Your Honor, this is turning into a complete circus. I motion for immediate dismissal of this child and continuation of normal proceedings. Seconded, Brewster added hastily, clearly embarrassed by being shown up by a 10-year-old. Maya opened her cardboard folder and pulled out a carefully typed document. Before you rule on that motion, Your Honor, perhaps you should review this. It's a signed affidavit from my father appointing me as his legal representative, properly witnessed and notarized according to Michigan state law. He has the constitutional right to choose his own counsel. She's 10 years old. Crawford practically shouted. Mozart was composing symphonies at 5, Maya replied calmly. Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein at 18. Malala Yousafzai was advocating for education rights at 11. Age doesn't determine capability, Mr. Crawford. Or haven't you read Peterson v. State Board of Education regarding age discrimination in legal proceedings? Judge Whitmore's eyes flicked to her clerk, who was frantically looking up the case citations Maya kept dropping like breadcrumbs. Each one checked out perfectly. Furthermore, Maya continued, stepping forward despite Bailiff Harrison's hovering presence, this court has a serious conflict of interest problem that needs to be addressed immediately. Your Honor, you share a last name with Richard Whitmore III, the complainant in this case. Are you related to him? The judge's face went from red to white in seconds. That has no bearing on these proceedings. Ethics Rule 2.11 states that a judge shall disqualify herself in any proceeding in which the judge's impartiality might reasonably be questioned, including but not limited to instances where the judge has a personal bias concerning a party or personal knowledge of disputed facts in the proceeding. How dare you question this court's integrity? I dare because my father's freedom is at stake, Maya shot back, her 10-year-old voice carrying the moral authority of absolute truth. I dare because the public defender assigned to him has spent exactly 10 minutes on his case and immediately suggested pleading guilty to a crime he didn't commit. I dare because justice isn't just a word carved into marble buildings, it's supposed to mean something real. The gallery was mesmerized. Several people were live streaming now, and the bailiffs didn't seem to know whether to stop them or not. #LetMayaSpeak was already starting to trend on social media. Last week, Maya continued, I met with 3 janitors from Whitmore and Associates. All of them told me the same story. Richard Whitmore has been pressuring maintenance staff to spy on rival law firms, to photograph confidential documents, to report on client meetings. When employees refuse, they mysteriously get accused of theft and fired. My father is just the latest victim. She pulled another document from her folder. This is a sworn statement from Maria Gonzalez, who was told not to come to work on October 15th. The same night my father was supposedly stealing files. She was paid $5,000 in cash to stay quiet. Crawford jumped up. Objection. This is hearsay and speculation. It's a statement by a party opponent's agent under Federal Rule of Evidence 801, D. Maya countered smoothly. Exception to hearsay, Mr. Crawford. Perhaps you should review the rules of evidence before your next case. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Whitmore was banging her gavel repeatedly, but the crowd was getting restless. This 10-year-old was systematically dismantling the prosecution's case with surgical precision. Your Honor, Maya pressed on relentlessly, I also have security footage from the Meridian Bank building across the street, which has a clear view of Whitmore and Associates employee entrance. The footage shows Richard Whitmore entering the building with security supervisor Bradley Hutchinson at 11:28 p.m. on October 15, 19 minutes before Hutchinson claims he started his shift, and hours before my father's keycard was allegedly used. She connected a laptop to the courtroom's display system. As you can see here, Mr. Whitmore told police he left the office at 6 p.m. and didn't return until the next morning. Was he lying then, or is someone lying now? The footage played on the screen, crystal clear despite the nighttime recording. There was Richard Whitmore, unmistakably entering the building with the security guard who had testified about the keycard violations. Furthermore, Maya continued, I have bank records showing a $10,000 deposit into Mr. Hutchinson's account on October 16, the day after the alleged theft. When questioned, he claimed it was a loan from his unemployed brother in Seattle. Public records show his brother has been unemployed for 2 years and filed for bankruptcy 6 months ago. Crawford was sweating now, his confident demeanor cracking. Your Honor, this is a fishing expedition by a child who doesn't understand legal procedure. This child, Maya said firmly, has uncovered more evidence in 3 days than the prosecutor bothered to find in his entire investigation. Either you're incompetent, Mr. Crawford, or you're complicit in framing an innocent man. Which is it? The courtroom was in chaos. Judge Whitmore was hammering her gavel furiously, but nobody was paying attention to her anymore. All eyes were on the 10-year-old girl who was single-handedly exposing a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of the local legal system. Order! Order! Judge Whitmore shouted over the noise. I will have order in my courtroom. But Maya wasn't finished. She pulled out her final piece of evidence, a thick manila envelope that she handled like it contained dynamite. Your Honor, this envelope contains emails between Richard Whitmore and Bradley Hutchinson, discussing what they call Operation Cleanup. The emails detail their plan to frame maintenance workers who refuse to participate in corporate espionage, to steal confidential information from competing law firms, and to use their access to destroy evidence of embezzlement. She pulled out printed emails, holding them up for the court to see. This email, dated October 14, says, and I quote, Thompson saw the shredding operation last week. We need to eliminate him before he talks. Use his keycard tomorrow night and make sure it shows maximum access. This has to stick. The courtroom exploded. Crawford was on his feet objecting. Richard Whitmore, who had been sitting in the gallery, suddenly stood up and began shouting about attorney-client privilege. Bailiffs were moving toward him as he tried to leave. These are private communications. Richard yelled. This is illegal search and seizure. Actually, Maya said calmly, you're not an attorney, Mr. Whitmore. You're the executive vice president of operations. These aren't legal communications, they're evidence of criminal conspiracy. And they were obtained legally through a wrongful termination lawsuit filed by Sandra Martinez, a former secretary who was fired for refusing to participate in your schemes. She turned to Judge Whitmore, whose face had gone ashen. Your Honor, I move for immediate dismissal of all charges against my father and request that the court order the arrest of Richard Whitmore III and Bradley Hutchinson for conspiracy, perjury, evidence tampering, and corporate espionage. The judge stared at the 10-year-old girl who had just blown apart a case that should have been a simple conviction. The evidence was overwhelming. The conspiracy was exposed. The corruption reached into her own family. Mr. Crawford, Judge Whitmore said slowly, does the prosecution wish to continue with these charges? Crawford looked at his shattered case, at Richard Whitmore being restrained by bailiffs, at the 10-year-old who had destroyed his reputation with nothing but truth and determination. The prosecution moves to dismiss all charges against Marcus Thompson, he said quietly. So ordered, Judge Whitmore said, bringing her gavel down with finality. Mr. Thompson, you are free to go. Court officers, please take Mr. Richard Whitmore III and Mr. Bradley Hutchinson into custody pending investigation of these new allegations. The courtroom erupted in cheers. Marcus Thompson was free, vindicated, and reunited with his extraordinary daughter who had saved him with nothing but love, courage, and 3 years of secret study. But this was only the beginning of Maya Thompson's incredible journey. Dear friends, if this unbelievable story of courage and justice inspired you, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell for more amazing true stories that will restore your faith in the power of truth. Drop a comment below and tell me, what would you have done in Maya's situation? Would you have had the courage to stand up against an entire corrupt system to save someone you love? And if you know someone who needs to hear this story of hope and justice, please share this video with them. Sometimes we all need a reminder that with enough courage and determination, even a 10-year-old can change the world. Thank you for watching, and remember, justice for all means all, regardless of age, wealth, or status. Maya Thompson proved that heroes come in all sizes, and sometimes the smallest voices speak the loudest truths.